It was October of 2012 and Halloween was in the air. Everyone's trying to figure out what they can do to set the spooky mood on their Saturday nights. Parties? Nah. Movies? Maybe. Video games? Resident Evil? Hell yeah. Resident Evil 6 was fresh out of the oven and was set to be the Resident Evil to end them all. 4 different campaigns, multiple game modes, and fresh HD graphics in the most action-packed entry in the series to date. What could possibly go wrong?
Everything.
Before we lampoon this game into the ground, I'd like to take a second to thank those beautiful people over at Dollar Shave Club for sponsoring our channel once again. Yes, that's right. When YouTube doesn't look out for us, they do. And I want to give a huge thank you to them for this. If you don't know who they are, allow me to, once again, drop some fresh knowledge upon you. We all have our everyday grooming routines. Waking up, showering, shaving, brushing your teeth, you know the drill. As we know, the NightmareExpo channel is primarily focused in horror. Now what's more horrifying than morning breath, a dirty neck beard, unkempt hair, swamp ass? Well, fear no more, because Dollar Shave Club, yes, that Dollar Shave Club has you covered with everything you need. Whether it's toothpaste, body wash, razors, butt wipes, sweet soothing shave butter, and pretty much anything else you need in the morning, they have it all to ensure that you look, feel, and smell your best. Check it out. Dollar Shave Club is basically giving away their Daily Essentials Starter Kit to new members for only $5. This includes 3 trial-sized versions of their most popular products to help you stay fresh and clean. Oh, and also, this includes their hefty executive razor for a definitive clean shave. In your first box, you'll receive their shave butter, body wash, and, you know how much I love these, their One Wipe Charlie's butt wipes. You'll also be getting their executive razor with a premium weighty handle and a full cassette of razor cartridges. After your first month, replacements are sent for only a few bucks a month. Get on this, you filthy animal. This $5 offer is available for you at dollarshaveclub.com/Nexpo. Once again, that's dollarshaveclub.com/Nexpo. The infamous 6th main installment in the long-running Resident Evil video game franchise is long known for being one of the most controversial entries in the series to date. The game, having released in October of 2012, did none other than split new and longtime Resident Evil fans into one of 2 categories, those that liked it and those that despised it. Off the back of the massive success found in Resident Evils 4 and 5, Capcom was in the process of a total paradigm shift away from what made Resident Evil so great in the first place. With this in mind, while I'd consider myself a massive fan of the original style of Resident Evil, I'd be lying if I told you that I hated Resident Evil 6. In fact, I believe that Resident Evil 6 was a good game. To some, it could even be considered a great game. While this is the case, I'd like to make it explicitly clear here. RE6, as a Resident Evil game, sucked. The very basic premise of this game surrounds the 4 main characters, Jake Muller, Chris Redfield, Leon Kennedy, and Ada Wong. In short, in December of 2012, Jake Muller, the son of Albert Wesker, flees local authorities during a bioterrorist attack. He soon partners with Sherry Birkin and learns that the Division of Security Operations has sought out to create a cure for what's called the C virus using Jake's blood. Sensibly, this is the same virus outbreak that's taking place worldwide, and while Jake and Sherry set out to accomplish this mission, they're consistently hunted by a hulking bioweapon by the name of Ustanok, whose main purpose is none other than to kill Jake Muller. Meanwhile, Chris Redfield and Pierce Nivens are heading the BSAA to combat the infected population in order to keep things under control. While executing their missions, however, they're attacked by an imposter Ada Wong, who actually turns out to be a woman by the name of Carla Radams, a member of the Neo Umbrella organization, the creator of the C virus, and the one responsible for the creation of Ustanok. In June of 2013, the president attempts to reveal the truth behind the 1998 Raccoon City incident and the involvements with Umbrella. Leon Kennedy and a woman by the name of Helena Harper are both in attendance, but things would quickly go awry. The campus that this was being held at was brutally attacked, and everyone inside, aside from the pair, were either infected or killed, including the Prez himself. After crossing paths with the real Ada Wong, they would work together to find and take out the leader of Neo Umbrella. However, with each character, not all would go to plan. Tonight, I set out to explore what this misfit got right and what it fell totally flat on. We're going to dive into how Resident Evil 6 even came into fruition, what was good about it, and what was not so good, in hopes of answering the overarching question: why did Resident Evil 6 fail so badly? In order to establish a clear depiction for how this game came to be, we need to back up from the subject matter at hand and take a look at the series as a whole and the overall direction that it was heading. If you're a longtime fan of the franchise, Resident Evil, to you, is rooted in 3 central principles: horror, strategic resource management, and the finely tuned execution of these aforementioned concepts. Resident Evils 1 through 3 set you off with the primary goal of instilling fear and anxiety within you. All throughout each game, you're met with a fixed camera angle system that, coupled with the gameplay, allowed for a challenging but entirely rewarding experience across the board as you traverse through each campaign, in fear of what would await you at each turn or camera shift. Story progression was much slower as well, and was presented in a manner that seemed more intimate, especially compared to the run-and-gun style of the newer games. The development mess that surrounded Resident Evil 4 is largely to blame for the deviation away from the original formula. Having undergone multiple iterations and revisions, RE4 was a pool of ideas and core implementations that made it entirely revolutionary when it was released. The entire basis of the thought process behind the dramatic shift stemmed from within Capcom themselves. Franchise fatigue began to plague the studio, as the first 3 Resident Evils were, according to them, largely the same, and leveraging this controversial sentiment, the push for dramatic changes in the core gameplay and story presentation were set into motion. Rather than the fixed camera and focus on strategy as implemented in Resident Evils 1 through 3, over-the-shoulder and fast-paced action sequences took the limelight.
Resident Evil 4's main character is Leon. Leon comes back from Resident Evil 2 in this series. And what makes this game so unique, as you can see here, is the camera is totally different than any other Resident Evil. It has been recreated from the ground up. You have the bullet display over here. You have the what do you call it? The wide screen with the bars on the top and bottom. This is all something very new. We've never tried before in the series. When Leon runs like this, you can see up to his knees. However, when he aims, it closes in on his torso, on his head, and his arms only.
With the critical success found in the entirely new engine that they crafted for this beast, the direction that Capcom would steer the series became largely evident, as they had finally found a vision that was fresh, exciting, and right on the mark. Gone were the days of intimate close-quarters survival horror, and instead, a newer, better focus was found in a style that Capcom would improve and expand upon in the coming years. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough for them. Off the backs of RE4, Resident Evil 5 was announced and showcased at E3 2007. Featuring protagonist Chris Redfield, the game looked like an enhanced version of its predecessor, largely inheriting the same control system and sense of flow that RE4 did. One strange thing that fans took notice of as well, though, was the implementation of a more intensive enemy system and a larger fundamental focus on action instead of horror. One major criticism that was found in Resident Evil 5, however, was the control scheme. Being one of the few complaints found in the critiques of its predecessor, it was, ultimately, reinstated in a manner that was largely the same. Players were unable to engage in moving melee combat, nor were they able to aim and fire while running. This lack of control that the series is mostly known for was beginning to become less of a staple and more of a roadblock. Capcom sought to appease this widespread complaint, doing so in a way that would, unfortunately, end up contributing to the driving force of this franchise into the ground. Now, we begin to notice a trend. Let's back up for a moment. The first 3 Resident Evils, like I stated prior, held a primary focus rooted in horror, strategic resource management, and an intimate storyline progression. Resident Evil 4 sought a more action-oriented take and lamented the concept of zombies in favor of ganados, plagued with what was called the Las Plagas virus. Resident Evil 5 shifted even further along the spectrum with the addition of the Magini, an even more intensive style of zombie that was infected with Ouroboros. Resident Evil, as a whole, was shifting along the spectrum from horror to action. The question that remained, though, was how far would they really go? The studio's answer to the increasing woes of the engine that they implemented so proudly was to incorporate a campaign system that would appease all Resident Evil fans, new and old alike. This would be something so big, so great, and so grand that it would be the Resident Evil to end them all. Unfortunately, that couldn't have been further from the case. Resident Evil 6 became the jack of all trades, however, as the old adage states, it was also the master of none. The basis of Resident Evil 6 centered around 4 different campaigns, each focusing on a franchise character that we had come to grow accustomed to in previous installments. This was a noble idea that unfortunately found itself falling flat more than anything. The main story consisted of campaigns with 4 different pairs. Leon Kennedy and Helena Harper were met with a nice mixture between action and the feeling brought upon us by RE4 and 5. Chris Redfield and Piers Niven's quests were largely reminiscent of the high-paced action along the likes of Call of Duty and Gears of War. Jake Muller and Sherry Birkin trekked through an up-close third-person, hands-on combat-oriented adventure, and Ada Wong was solo in a storyline that contained probably the largest amount of puzzles out of all of them, harboring the feelings of the old-school sense of progression and item management. The issues that plagued Resident Evil 6 lied in one central issue that I previously mentioned, and will mention again many times throughout the rest of this video: the lack of polished execution. Having a vision of massive acclaim that would harbor back to the glory days of Resident Evil 4, Capcom set its sights on trying to appease every type of Resident Evil fan, those that enjoyed the old and those that enjoyed the new. With this, they also tried to loop in more action-oriented players in order to attempt to broaden their overall fan base. The issue with this was, though, the lack of polish that such a game should bring in order to do so. More so, each of the game's 4 campaigns tied together with a plot of action, not horror. But why? Why did Resident Evil do away with what made it so great in the first place? Like I said, RE6 is a good game in itself. It, however, is a terrible Resident Evil game. Now, before we dive into why Capcom decided to steer the series in this controversial direction, let's take a look at RE6 as a game and judge the good and the bad before taking a look within Capcom themselves. As I said before, Resident Evil 6 wasn't without its merits. The game overall played as a fantastic action shooter. The UI in this one ultimately centered around what the game considered as comms devices. These were primarily purposed for data communication, and in-game, they relay vital stats directly to the player in a personalized view, depending on who you're playing as. The player health tablets, current stamina, ammo type and number, and magazine size were all readily available to players in a direct and unobtrusive fashion in the bottom corner of the screen. These devices were also functional in allowing instantaneous weapon switching whenever the player so desired. By using the directional pad, a previously clunky at best system of switching weapons was streamlined into a method that allowed players to, at the push of a button, switch to whichever weapon they so desired almost instantaneously. Health revitalization was also given this same treatment. Rather than pausing or opening up a menu screen as done in previous RE titles, players could heal themselves on the fly, allowing for a faster, more fluid flow of the conventions altogether. This same treatment was given to the clunky control system that plagued not only Resident Evil 5, but 4 and 3 and 2 and basically all the other Resident Evils that were ever released. Resident Evil 6 is what I like to regard as the most control-savvy game out of all of them. Pretty much any action command that you could think of has a button combination to suit, and with this came a much more fluid style of gameplay. Innovations in this style also included mechanics such as rolling in any direction, running while shooting, and even maneuvers that allowed for more intensive melee combat. Each character had their own strengths and weaknesses in their respective campaigns, and this truly allowed for a unique and dynamic gameplay presentation that almost entirely answered everyone's previous woes. In addition to this, cooperative gameplay was also introduced as a major gameplay mechanic, and, like Resident Evil 5, allowed players to venture through each storyline on varying difficulties that they saw fit. Now hold on a second. My god, how can I talk about all the good within this game and not mention how well crafted and tense Jake Muller's campaign was? So at the onset, we're met with Jake, a mercenary, as he encounters Sherry Birkin through combat. It soon becomes evident that he carries a C-virus cure within his blood, making him completely immune to this virus and many others. The bulk of the campaign follows the pair as they hunt for a widespread cure to prevent the ever-expanding presence of the Javo. However, the kicker in this campaign is this goddamn beast right here. This big-ass motherfucker caused me so much stress and tension throughout this campaign that it drove me crazy every time he'd randomly show up to cause me some torment. It's like, right when I think I've escaped from his reach and I'm in a safe spot, nope. This guy is damn near invincible, and that mechanical arm claw drill thing attached to him will rip you to shreds and back in an instant. The inclusion of the Ustanok is very easily one of my favorite aspects of this entire game, because it was something that was done right. Being the answer to Resident Evil 3's Nemesis, this gave this game a recognizable face to remember it by, and I really wish the other character plots were given this same treatment. Anyway, moving on, let's touch on overall content. What is a game without content? Resident Evil 6 definitely did not skip out on this, with their 4 interwoven storylines, online mercenaries, Agent Hunt, Onslaught, Survivors, Predator, and lastly, Siege. This game had so many ways that you could play that it had the possibility for endless hours of fun. But was it really? Unfortunately, the other side of what makes a good game good is how well it stacks up against the legacy of its predecessors. And well, while Resident Evil 6 was pretty good within itself, it definitely did not sit well with Resident Evil fans at all. To lead off on this section, let's take a look at the elephant in the room that everyone seems to hate, and Resident Evil 6 seemed to shove down our throats at every moment that they could. Quick time events.
Hey guys, what's going on? It's your good friend NightmareExpo from the future. I just wanted to jump in here and give a quick editor's cut to let you guys know that right now you need to press X or else I'm gonna die. So let's just get on that and yeah, let's press that X button. Just you know, extend my life a little bit here. Come on, let's press the damn X button. Fuck!
You ever, had a game that you were enjoying and really into, only to reach a cutscene where you could kick back and take a deeper look into the lore of the story with a quick cinematic cut? You ever thought to yourself, hey, you know what would make this game fun? Some timed button mashing sequences that could keep me busy. No? Nobody? Yeah, well, not Capcom. Nah, Leisure? Nah, you don't get that. We're gonna force some stupid and senseless QuickTime events into this game that make you pull your hair out and get an automatic game over when you inevitably fail them a few times. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, let's do that. Aside from the lazy game design surrounding this, it just isn't fun. For a game that already fundamentally alienates just about its entire core audience, you would think that it would do some things right. At least the cutscenes, god damn it, it was a poor choice. Now that that's out of the way, let's look at the broken sense of flow in this game. I'll say this again and again. concepts work well if they're executed well. In Resident Evil 6, they were not executed well for the game that it was trying to be. Leon, Chris, Jake, and Ada's storylines are all starkly different from one another for no real reason other than to try to appease every type of Resident Evil fan that could ever exist. And it's dead obvious. As we established prior, in Leon's, progression and flow happen in probably that sweet spot between action and attempted horror. It plays overall like an RE4 game, just without all the tension that made RE4, well, RE4. Chris's is third-person Call of Duty, need I really say more? Jake's plays out as a superpower-infused action thriller that has you performing acrobatic combos and constant up-close melee action. And Ada's, well, Ada's probably plays the closest to real strategic Resident Evil. It, however, performs way worse than it should, as many of the puzzles fall flat more than anything. Okay, so let's back up. We have a lackluster RE4 wannabe, we have a third-person Call of Duty, we have a super-powered fighter, and lastly, a flat campaign full of puzzles. What even is this game trying to be? This is one of the biggest issues I had with this, being that I actually enjoyed Leon and Jake's for what they were, but absolutely despised Chris and Ada's. This leads to such a broken experience in an already convoluted mess of a game, and it just isn't fun as a whole. Pick a direction, pick a style, and go with it. Either all of the game is a wannabe RE4, or none of the game is a wannabe RE4. The half-baked experiences just drove this Resident Evil game as a whole into the ground. Okay, so one of the most vital aspects of what makes a good game good is the soundtrack. You can have an absolutely shit game. But if the soundtrack is good, then that's, at the very least, one redeeming factor that it can be remembered for. Sure, you gave me terrible experiences with a shitty game, but if the soundtrack is good, or even great, I can appreciate that in its own light. Let's take a look at this video here. All Resident Evil save room themes. Let's just take a look and see if we can spot any outliers here. So game by game here. Resident Evil 1's save room theme is an absolute and timeless classic. Here we have a gracious aura accompanied by the slow rising and falling of strings, giving us the feeling that yes, we're alone in a zombie-infested mansion. However, we're safe. For now. Resident Evil 2 takes a more serious approach in its tone. The deep piano hits accompanied by the high-end notes give us a strange and ominous feeling of safety, with the looming danger of death right at our backs. Resident Evil 3 instills a very similar feeling as 2, with notes that are largely the same. However, this time, the deep aura is even more overpowering, almost as if it's representative of Nemesis himself. Resident Evil 4's is another timeless classic. However, here, they split up these themes into two different ones. Since Resident Evil 4's safe rooms and save themes had two different songs, it's safe to pick apart both. The actual save theme gives off the feeling of being stuck inside of a motel room in the dead middle of the night as we ponder the next route to take or mystery to solve in order to escape this predicament that we found ourselves in. Isolation is one word that I can use to describe the feeling given off by this one. Ironically, the exact opposite of what's instilled into me with Serenity, the safe room track in RE4. Fittingly titled, this track fades in whenever you approach the area near the merchant in-game. Through all of the endless fighting and shooting through each game area,
Hearing this fade in does none other than give me a chance to let out a big ass sigh of relief as I find that blue aura in the near distance. Resident Evil 5's, oh my dear god, the subtle sound effects and additions into the background of this one give us the feeling that we're, fittingly, lost in the desert with minimal time for rest and screwing around. Jumping ahead, Resident Evil 7. God, if you had to describe this entire game to someone with just 10 seconds of audio, the opening portion of this song would be it. The subtle twang on top of the ominous aura gives off a sense of,
yeah, you're screwed.
Hearing this while I played Madhouse mode actually made me just want to sit there and contemplate my next move, as I really didn't know how to tackle the extra monsters that were being thrown my way, with minimal ammo to suit. God, what a gem. And then going back, we have this. Dear God, what the hell is this? Is this still Resident Evil? After finishing the game, these songs absolutely do not stick with me whatsoever. I've mentioned how the songs of the other Resident Evils could represent their entire games, and yeah, this one holds up here too. This uninspired mess absolutely can represent RE6, as it's boring, bland, and sticks out like a sore thumb from the soundtracks of the rest of the series. Alright, enough about soundtracks, now moving on. The single biggest complaint I have about this game is the fear factor. It's just bad. It isn't scary in the slightest, and it tries far too hard to be an action shooter, free from any horror that the previous installments instilled within you. I think the major issue stems from the overall design of the game, and back then, the running series as a whole. Let's take a step back and look at Resident Evil altogether. Pre-RE4 games left you with a fixed camera, clunky controls, and overall, a feeling of isolation as you traverse through the various areas of each game. Let's go back to Resident Evil 1. This game probably has just as many zombies in the entire game as Leon's storyline has in the first act. Each encounter with the undead back then presented you with something that RE6 simply does not. A challenge. Remember that area in RE1 next to that save point by the stairs? Remember that goddamn zombie that freaked you out to hell and back the first time you encountered it back there? It was terrifying and left you pondering whether to kill it or run by it. Do you face your fear and eradicate this threat with your valuable ammo and resources? Or do you run and place the location of them in the back of your mind for future reference? This is merely one of the many examples of isolated encounters that presented the player with a strategic decision. I mean, for God's sake, I remembered one single zombie. If I can sit here and pick out one singular thing about something that freaks me out, then that's a good game. Strategy. Resident Evil has always been rooted in strategy, and with this, the feeling of dread set in naturally. Here, they throw all of that out of the window. Fear? Nah. Strategic decision making? Nah, we don't need that. Isolation? What's that? Resource management? Who needs it? Let's just throw a shit ton of zombies at the player and let them duke it out. COD style. It's just bad. The game design is bad, and it all ties back to the devolving execution of the very good engine that Capcom created to move away from what made Resident Evil so good in the first place. I want to go on a tangent here and talk briefly about the decision regarding the camera. I believe that over-the-shoulder and fixed camera angles each have their merits and fallbacks. However, just like the engine overall, the execution is what makes or breaks it. In Resident Evil 1, our fixed camera establishes one simple principle: seeing precisely what the developers want us to see, and in turn, experiencing something exactly as it was meant to be experienced. This worked out largely in their favor too. As an example, let's take a look at close quarters progression. RE1 establishes a presentation style that gives off a sense of scale whenever they needed to do so. Corridors and narrow hallways have strategically placed camera angles to instill a feeling of claustrophobia for the player. Stairwells take a high viewpoint to give us a sense of grandiose scale. Certain walkways in the game have a view that seems to mimic somebody lurking in the shadows and watching every move that we make. In Resident Evil 6, this feeling of being watched becomes thrown completely out the window as we're given a direct behind-the-shoulder view of everything with total freedom to experience something not as the developer intended, but as we intend ourselves.
This, with the extremely fast-paced nature of RE6, kills off any sliver of horror that would remain in this game, as it gives the player the very real possibility of glossing over minute details, the feeling of tension, and vital world building that would otherwise be crafted to perfection prior. Now, I will say fixed camera angles do have their issues. However, this video is meant to highlight why Resident Evil 6 failed, so maybe I'll touch on this topic in greater detail in the future. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that RE6 was trying to be somebody that it wasn't. It was trying to expand in all the wrong ways upon an engine that originally moved the series away from what made it so great in the first place. So, why did Capcom let it get to this? Let's go back and take a look at them from the inside, shall we? So what happened? Soon after the release of RE5, the concept of Resident Evil 6 was born. In March of 2009, producer
Masachika Kawata
stated that the new installment would take 4 to 8 years to develop and would be drastically different from its predecessors. When development of the game had finally begun, co-producer
Yoshiaki Hirabayashi
stated that he wanted the game to revolve around the ultimate horror entertainment, including all aspects of Resident Evil that people loved. In 2012, though, this idea would have a concurrent and lingering repercussion that would befall every fan of the genre. This year, Capcom admitted that the survival horror market was too small for Resident Evil and that they wanted to reach out further than this niche market. As a result, the game wouldn't be built around horror, but instead action. This was meant to, quote, evolve the series, allowing it to appeal to a mainstream audience while attempting to keep the die-hard RE fans locked in for years to come. As we know, this couldn't be further from the case, and in October of 2012, the monstrosity that we know as Resident Evil 6 would finally be born. While Capcom has historically put out mostly fantastic experiences, unfortunately their own arrogance blinded them from the ever-present truth of unsatisfied and alienated fans. Resident Evil 6 was a uniquely strange entry into a widely beloved series. The game's overall vision, while broken and convoluted, largely represents the oblivious mindset that befell Capcom from within themselves. Moving away from the style that you've always been known for is unfortunately just a natural part of evolution in any medium. In this case, Capcom pushed the limits of just how fast they could do it, and in the process became so blinded as to what made their beloved series so great in the first place. Jumping ahead, Resident Evil 7 is the direct result of a series at rock bottom. I only hope that they keep a level head and heed the pleas of the deeply enveloped fans whenever something goes awry. Resident Evil has and always will be rooted in horror. Resident Evil is rooted in strategy. Resident Evil is rooted in isolation. What separates a good entry from a bad one is and always will be execution. As they say, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. With this in mind, coupled with the direction that they took the franchise reboot, I can only hope that the creative rut that Capcom found themselves in doesn't happen once more, especially for a franchise as widely beloved as this.
Go tell and Rhodey. Go tell and Rhodey. Go tell and Rhodey that everybody's dead. I was raised in a deep dark hole, a prisoner with no parole. They locked me up and took my soul. Go tell and Rhodey. Go tell and Rhodey. Go tell and Rhodey that everybody's. His arms outstretched, but when she's done, he'll be torn